Thank you for joining us, Charles, our U.S. national champion.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's really great to be on here, and obviously, really excited to have actually won the nationals. It feels great.
Honestly, so happy for you. That was my ideal timeline. I had two timelines. One, either I win the event.
Of
The other, no, no,
course.
no. I want you to win the whole event. Let's
Yeah, I
get.
saw your meme on Twitter with like the you can't decide between the two buttons. Yeah, so good. At least one of those two came true.
I was quite happy about that. Get Briar out of here. See you finally get your win. Oh, best
hmm
timeline. So, how does it feel to be the one to get rid of Briar with, of all things, fatigue? This is such an interesting storyline.
Yeah, I was a storyline that I had been, kind of predicting, like half jokingly for a few weeks before the event because I knew I was going to be on this list for a while.
I thought you were
And I'm
going to
like,
say you
man,
knew that
wouldn't
you're
it be
going to
great?
win.
Well,
Yeah, I was predicting the story.
I
I
was
knew I was
joking, like,
always winning.
oh yeah, it was in the bag the whole time. But no, I knew I was gonna come into this with Reaping Blade Briar, and of course, there's a chance I win, and I just thought it would be, the greatest thing ever to send her to Living Legend without using Rosetta Thorn, and lo and behold, of course, it came true. And so I've been thinking about that for a while, and it feels really great to have actually done it. I don't have any particular affinity to Briar kind of before this. I mean, I dabbled with Briar here and there, but never really considered myself a Briar main by any means. People know me much more for Oldhim and Starvo before that. And so, I just kind of come in like, hey, I see you guys are having trouble getting Briar over the hump to Living Legend. Let me give you a little nudge and push her right over the edge.
Yeah,
So
I feel
that
like
feels
there's
pretty
one
good.
card in here that you did have an affinity for, right at the top there.
Crown of Seeds for quite a while now. Obviously started with Starvo and Ultim and now Briar. Crown of Seeds is just, it's probably my favorite Flesh and Blood card, right? It does so many things, specifically for a fatigue strategy, right? It gives you kind of free block in the sense that it doesn't take a card out of your deck to prevent a damage. It gives you the consistency to cycle out your arsenal. It just feels like decks that run Crown of Seeds just like run very smooth and you're always very efficient. You don't really have stumbles if you're running Crown of Seeds, and that's what I love so much about it.
Where did you come up with the idea for this deck? And was this like all on your own? Did you figure this out on your own? Because like I have in my head canon, you were just like Iron Man, just in the cave by yourself, just like hammering away at the deck. Come out of the cave, just here's my Briar deck.
That is, more accurate than you think. Yeah. So when Dust to Dawn, the most recent set, was spoiled, I knew I was kind of in the middle of like I was moving across the country. I recently just moved, and I'm like, hey, I can't commit all that much time to testing for nationals with the team, and so I'm like, I'm just gonna like focus in on one deck, and I'm gonna pick it early so I have time to focus in on it. I actually just ended up picking this Briar deck relatively early on, and most of it was just kind of me alone testing it again on Talishar. Yeah, and it turned out pretty well, it turns out. But the kind of the origin of why I picked Briar in the first place was the some of the new cards from Dusk to Dawn, Anthem of Spring in particular. It seemed like a really good defensive option, being able to create an extra embodiment on your opponent's turn when you block with Unity. Everyone's favorite Dust to Dawn card, Warmonger's Diplomacy. For a lot of people, they want to play it for the effect, right? To mess with the opponent when you cast it. I saw it as, hey, there's another blue block 3 non-attack action that blocks for 4 with an embodiment of Earth. That has other text on it too, I guess. But importantly, it's a blue block 3 non-attack action, so it fit perfectly into Briar. And so those two cards kind of put me on the Briar track. And because I was just kind of trying to focus in on one deck, it seemed like Briar was a pretty good choice given the new cards.
But we're not actually trying to use it as a block 3 in the deck. No, 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 no. We're trying to use
Uh,
that as a go in the 4 hole, right?
yeah, pretty much all of the cards in the blue section here, they all have text on them, which is nice. But for the most part, they block for 4. Right? It's like, oh, here's this, Warmonger's Diplomacy, great card to shut down Lexi. I'm gonna block for 4 with it. This round's on me, can reduce their attack. I'm gonna block for 4 with it.
What about on hit draw a card for everything that you play this turn?
Oh my god, Force of Nature, that card is an insane powerhouse in Channel Mount Heroic. I'm gonna block for 4 with it. This just like every blue in this deck just ends up blocking for 4, in some way or another. That's what I love about it. It's just hyper consistent in that way.
I want to know just like how much psychic damage you dealt to people over the day, like before people knew what was going on, of them just being like, "What is this pile of just like nonsense cards that my opponent's playing?" Like,
I was just like playing cards that were just bad in draft, right? Like blue come to fight, like No one's picking that card in draft. Like Raging Onslaught, pretty medium.
You know,
Evergreen, pretty medium.
that's kind of
All
funny.
stars in this deck.
That's
All
like
stars.
two Nats in a row where it's been random draft chaff cards being what wins the entire national champion. That's kind of funny.
Yeah, there's the fundamental math of Flesh and Blood is just all about getting that efficiency on your cards, and turns out a lot of the draft commons are really good at just like the basic math. The Wounded Bull, the Raging Onslaughts of the world are just they're just efficient. They just totally acceptable, and sometimes that's exactly what your deck needs.
So, what was your tournament run like? What was your your matchups? What was your record and everything like that?
Yeah, so day one started off going 4-0 in constructed. I pretty much like all four of those games were no sweat. Nobody really knew what I was doing. Everyone assumed I was standard Channel Mount Heroic Briar. They were presenting kind of a lean 60 cards. They were siding out their defensive or anti-fatigue tools. And yeah, I kind of ran over those four opponents pretty handily because my deck was kind of catching them off guard. Got into the draft portion, drafted a reasonable Bolton deck. It was nothing super special. I thought it was a 2-1 deck, and lo and behold, it was a 2-1 deck. So I ended day one at 6-1. Day two, I start the draft, and I intend to go Prism because that's Prism, as you know, is a great hero, especially in draft. That was my intent, but Prism got cut pretty hard initially. Actually, the pack I opened had like literally 5 Prism cards in it between the rares and foils and whatnot. And I'm just like, I'm just going to pass 5 Prism cards to my left and avoid Prism now because there are going to be people to my left on Prism.
Yeah, because you're just creating a Congo line next to you if you pass that.
That was my plan, right? And after opening the pack, and I get past like a third or fourth pick red Courageous Steel hand, and then I get another red Courageous Steel hand right afterwards. I'm like, okay, clearly Bolton's open. Let's just move into Bolton. I'd already picked some generic light cards, and so moved into Bolton. The pack distribution was kind of weird. I didn't end up with a Gallantry Gold. Neither did the other Bolton, so like just none were opened. But I did open a V of the Vanguard, which was insane. And I did get past a late Bolting Blade, the Majestic that is, the 4 for 7, costs 2 less for each time you've charged. And so all 3 games in that draft, I just found one of those two, V or Bolting Blade, arsenaled it, and then waited, found the other one, and then went V of the Vanguard, double charge, axe, Bolting Blade for like a 23 damage turn that they just couldn't block. And I 3-0'd that draft quite handily.
Die.
So, yeah, that was like a constructed level combo that I just busted out in draft 3 times. So a little bit lucky there, but also reading the signal to identify Bolton was open and then being past the power cards for him. That worked out well for me.
I think that's like really important too to highlight. I'm identifying that this is a good Prism pack, but I'm just going to ship it because this is not where I want to be because I'm creating multiple next to me. And I think that's something that people don't talk about enough in Fab Draft, what you create to your left. People really focus on what's coming from their right, I think, a little too much.
Yeah, just being able to understand that and adapt on the fly. Like, at the end of the day, it's still a card game. You need to like get a little bit lucky. And I'll admit that draft guy got a little bit lucky because of the cards I opened and was passed. But, I put myself in a good position to capitalize on that by being in the right hero and, avoiding forcing Prism like I kind of wanted to. Oh yeah, so after the draft, I'm X-1, feeling pretty great about my chances. I just need to win, I think it's 2 more to lock myself into top 8. So first round, I get, first round of constructed back at it, I get a nice, easy opponent in Michael Fang, who's not actually a nice, easy opponent. He's one of the best players in the world, so I'm a little bit nervous going into this, especially because at this point, the jig is up. People kind of know what I'm doing. They saw me on day 1.
He was Lexi, right?
He was on Lexi, yes. I know that he knew what I was doing, and he was going to be prepared. So when we sit down, we shuffle up, he presents 68 cards into me instead of, the standard clean 60. And I'm like, okay, he's clearly prepared for this. He has a game plan. This is going to be a tight match. And it was. It was a very close matchup. We played it out on stream, on the feature match. It came right down to the wire, and kind of right as time was being called, he was on his very last turn. Like, he had 2 cards in hand, none in deck. And he was just seeing if he can push those last few points, and he determined that he couldn't, and he conceded right as time was called, because I would win in the next, 2 turns, because he had literally nothing left in his deck.
So that was good sportsmanship on his part.
It was, yes. I really appreciate that. And, you know, I've been known for playing fatigue decks in the past, and I think when I played Ultim in the past, those games were more likely to come down to the timer. This deck, that was my only match where it came even remotely close to the timer, outside of top 8, which is untimed, obviously. I think this deck plays reasonably fast, but it's just a matter of, you know, if you are taking your time to really think through all the lines, it can go up close to the timer. So I really appreciate him kind of recognizing the state of the game and conceding there on the very last turn. Right, so after playing against Michael Fang, I know I'm now playing a win and in for top 8 for 3 rounds in a row, which is, you know, it's a very good spot to be in. You know, I got a few shots at this. And so I sit down against Holden Isaac.
You just can't buckle under the pressure at this point.
Right. So a little nervous, but you know this. I know this is a good spot to be in. And I'm playing against Holden, who is playing a very similar list. He is also playing this defensive-minded Briar deck. And I was kind of worried about that. Like, I hadn't seen his list. I didn't know exactly what his tech was, his exact build. But we did kind of go into it, you know, knowing what each other's up to. And we both presented literally every legal card in our deck. For me, that was 73 cards, you know, minus 7 equipment. And for Hold On, I think it was 72. I think
the game's already over. You got the card up.
It's great. It's great. So as we're playing it, we're playing very fast because we know this is going to go kind of right down to time, or at least, you know, it's going to take, you're going to go the distance. And so we're playing rather quick. The matchup was all about who can get more kind of deck damage, not really life damage. You're trying to burn cards out of your opponent's deck, whether that comes through casting Evergreen, because it'll go back on the bottom of your deck. Gaining life off things like Final's Fighting Spirit or Heart of Findall is important, because that's kind of, you know, each life you gain is kind of like half to a third of a card in a way, and so on. Things like that, like just trying to eke out like every little point of value you can get out of every single card in your deck. You don't really want to block for 2 with things, you want to attack with them, and so on.
Did it play kind of like an Ultim mirror, or was it like its own weird different matchup that like wasn't like that?
In a way, you could think of it like an Ultim mirror, right? Ultim mirror is all about the weapon, right? You play Sledge of Anvilheim because that costs 0 cards out of your deck to attack for 6. And here your weapon is not nearly as impactful, so Evergreen is kind of like your fake weapon. It's your weapon that attacks for 7. So in a way, a lot of those same kind of ideas transfer over, where, you know, you're trying to get every little point of value out of each card and trying not to burn cards out of your deck while burning cards from your opponent. We did have some key differences in our deck build, and differences that favored me in this particular matchup. I had Unmovables. I had Remembrance and Pulse of Candlehold, you know, ways to kind of rebuy a few cards out of your graveyard. I also had Last Ditch Effort. So I think I played the matchup a little bit. I didn't get as much value out of the life gain cards, right? The Oasis, the Findalls, the Heart of Findall. He was getting more value out of those than I was. I think I could have played a little bit better in that regard. But when we got right down to it, we both had about 5 cards left in our deck. For me, that meant I had an arsenal and 4 cards in hand and none in deck. And those 4 cards were Heart of Findall, Last Ditch Effort, Evergreen. I was just able to go, you know, pitch Last Ditch Effort into pitch Last Ditch Effort into pitch a red Swing Sword, which took every card out of his deck and leaked damage, and then that won the game, because Last Ditch Effort is great in that exact situation.
Okay, so you won your fatigue mirror. You're going in. Yeah. The sweat's gone.
Yeah.
You're guaranteed locked. You're just playing for seat now.
Correct. Yeah. At this point, I'm still X1 with 2 rounds to go. So at worst, I can be X and 3, and a lot of the X3s will make it, and I would naturally have the highest tiebreakers. So I knew I was locked in. At this point,
does play draw matter to you really on this deck of like being higher seat, or do you not really? Whatever. You're just at 4, 4, 4. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter much. The deck often prefers to go second into a lot of matchups, just because you can start setting the tempo of, I'm going to attack you for 7 or 8. And then, you know, if you don't defend it, I get an embodiment to defend your 5-card hand. Honestly, it doesn't matter much. Not nearly as much as many other decks, because the games go so long. The difference in player draw kind of wash out over time.
That makes sense.
Right, but still want to play for seeding. Still want to play for rating, constructed elo rating. So next round I'm up against Evan, who I eventually then end up facing in the finals. Yeah, we're on a pretty low stress game because, you know, we both know we're locked in. We're just going to play. And I think in that matchup, he maybe wasn't as aware of what I was trying to do as Michael Fang was. He presented, I think, 60 or 61 cards, like a very lean deck. And I was able to pretty easily block him out, and I think ran him out of cards when I was around, you know, 20 life, or maybe slightly less than that. So Was able to take that win during Swiss quite easily, but once again, it was kind of a low-stress game, didn't really matter. But at this point, I'm locked for top seed. Final round of Swiss, totally for fun. I can't lose top seed. I play against teammate Lucas Oswald, who absolutely smashes me on Icelander. I mean, I got embarrassed. He demolished me. He just went like, Icelander, famous for going wide, just went like scar for a scar, scar for a scar, pop an energy potion to command and conquer. And
Classic Icelander round.
Yeah, that's the classic Icelander. And then so I block out, and then on my turn he goes, Emmer to Scolding 7U. He did that a lot, and I got demolished. But
that kid's a genius.
It is very good at this game, turns out. But of course, we were both locked at that point, and so we go and prep for the top 8 for the next day.
So like now we see the bracket for top 8. How are you feeling about it at this point? Do you think you got a real good shot of winning the whole thing? You a little uncomfortable? Anything you're trying to avoid or anything like that? Or like you think this bracket's just like set up for you basically?
I am terrified of the way the bracket is set up. First look at it, I'm like, okay, I'm against Dan Rutkowski on Icelander first round. I think it's a reasonable matchup for me. I think it's close.
He's also teammate. Same with Lucas. Yes. So they're on probably, I think, the same deck, maybe within a card.
I think so, yeah. And so Lucas, me playing him in Swiss last round really kind of rattled me. I'm like, oh, I thought this was reasonable, but he just demolished me. Like, what gives? And
it's probably the worst Icelanders in the room also for you because they know what's up. They've had prep into this list. They've played games into it at this point. It's not a surprise.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of speaks to a broader conversation about, like, I built this deck with the intention of dominating the Swiss rounds and making it to top 8. And then once I'm in top 8 and my deck list is public and people have, like, a night to think about what I'm doing, I had no real expectations of going too much further. Like, people are going to find a way and counteract, and I'm not going to get those free wins. Mm-hmm. I know it's still it's a reasonable deck if they do that, but it's not like a game breaker, like meta breaker, if they do know what's going on.
You're getting an edge from the surprise factor and the lack of prep.
Yeah, and then the edge is mostly gone come top 8, which I accepted. But at that point, you're in top 8, right? You can't be too upset if you make top 8, and that's where you start.
Just gonna have to walk away with $1,000. Woe is me.
Oh no. So I also knew, Dan being a teammate, he's gonna make it a really close match. As we actually went into it, he was not able to get as much aggression or chip damage in the early game, the first cycle that Lucas did to me in Swiss. He didn't really have the go wide multiple attacks into an arcane damage turn. So by the time we got down to the point where he's starting to cast his Frost Hexes, which he doesn't want to cast early because I can Diabolic them. By the time he's actually getting to that point, I'm at a relatively healthy life total, and I can kind of keep up the pressure on him and not really worry about getting burned out. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to take it there at the end by just keeping the life total high on first cycle, forcing him to combo off when it doesn't actually kill me. But after I got through that round, or rather looking past that round the night before, I saw I'd have to play the winner of you and Craig Krempels, you on Dromai and Craig on Lexi. And that was where I had resigned my fate. I saw your list, or at least something very close to your list, running Big Dragon Dromai with 3 Remembrance. I'm like, okay, if Pheano wins, I can't possibly beat this. This is like, I played a Dromai in Swiss on day 1. And they thought I was on standard version. They just presented 60 cards. No Remembrance, obviously.
What version of Dromai were they?
I think they were a bigger dragon. They had Tomultai, and they had a few extra blues. Wasn't a ton. They did not have Remembrance, or at least they didn't board it in. And so I was able to deal with 1 Tomultai and 1 set of Mirror Guys and Chromais. If they brought them back for second, third, or fourth go around, yeah, I'm not dealing with that.
I just simply don't have they register Ghostly Touch on top of that? Oh my god.
Ooh. I don't know if they did that, but I saw your list had many of those tools, and I just accepted if Pheano beats Craig, I'm dead in the semifinals. I will go and put on a good fight, but I might as well just concede and go grab food, right? Go take a break.
But that's not the timeline that we live in.
That is not the timeline we live in, because Craig is a filthy high roller and just absolutely demolished you in the quarterfinals.
I'm happy someone other than me said it this time. So how do you feel about his list?
Craig's?
Yeah. Because he looked a bit more teched for fatigue than your average Lexi right now. He seemed like he also knew what was up going into this tournament and went, no, I'm not just losing to rando fatigue decks.
Anything was an upgrade over your list for me. I'm like, whatever Craig's running, it can't be that bad. It can't be bad as triple Remembrance.
No, it's not 100-0.
right? It can't be that bad. But then when I actually sat down and looked at his list, then I'm like, oh god, there's 3 Codex of Inertias. Damn, that's gonna stink.
And he had the quiver.
I was a bit worried, and the quiver of Abyssal Depths. Yeah, I was more nervous, right, than against any Lexi I've seen before. Obviously, Craig was most teched. Obviously, Craig is a great player too. So I am nervous, but I have a game plan. I know what I've got to do, and I have a fighting shot at it. I don't know if it's a great shot given all the tech and prep he has, but I have a reasonable shot. And as we saw in the actual match, it went right down to the wire. Like very very low life on both ends
Was
for
it
many
like
turns.
1-1 or something like that?
Yeah, I think so. I know it like went down to 1, then back up to 2 off of fine dolls or something. Like, I was skating those margins for a few turns in order to get there. So yeah, it was a close match. It was a nail biter, and was able to actually get there in the end, which was great.
But did the
And
table
then
banter get to you? Did he get in your head?
it didn't. There wasn't as much table banter. I
His,
mean, Craig's
his
is
entire
a good
edge is
friend of mine.
gone. His entire edge.
Yeah. He's a good friend of mine. We have a lot of good banter over the time. He's a great guy to be able to play an entertaining game with. But honestly, in the semifinals, we were a bit more business, a bit more kind of focused in on the game.
I didn't realize that he bantered that much going into this event because the previous times I'd played with him, it was like cursed late. Like we went to so the first time I met Craig and Dalton, we went to it was the first ProQuest season, I think. And we went to the store, and for God knows what reason, they decided to start the event at like 5 p.m. or something.
Oh God!
And it went to like 2 or 3 a.m. And
How can you possibly do that?
and Craig and Dalton were in top 4. And I'm sticking around because one of my boys is trying to get his invite. So, and then all of us, I think, I think Craig and Dalton also were. We were all planning on going to another ProQuest the following morning at 10 a.m. that we had to drive an hour to. So we were dead. And so my interactions with Craig at that event, I'm assuming he was very tired. So I didn't really see much of the banter. So when I played him this past weekend, this was my first time really seeing that. And I'm like, what is this? I'm not used to someone bantering back to me. This is my thing. What? This is crazy.
Yeah, he has some good banners. We had a little bit, but yeah, I mean, the stakes were high, and we wanted to. We played tight, and it was an intense game. So a little bit less than normal, but still, I do love me some good table banter. And then moving on to the finals, right? So I managed to get past Craig, who was like very well texted for me in the Lexi matchup, and then back with a rematch with Evan, who had played earlier in Swiss. And so I came into this, I used the exact same sideboarding I had for Craig, where I basically played 71 cards, everything except the Diabolic Ultimatums. And that was because I assumed that Evan would kind of adapt and be like, okay, I lost to him in Swiss, and I've seen what he does. I need to play basically every legal card, or like
I know what's up now.
Yeah, that was my assumption. Evan actually presented, I think he said 63 cards, which was basically like his core deck against Briar, like his lean aggro package, and then I think just added in a few extra cards here, and I think he had 1 Remembrance. I think that sounds right. And like that was really it. And I was kind of surprised when he did that, and I'm like, okay, this bodes well for me, but it's still got to play tight. When I was playing in the moment, I felt very well in control of the game. I felt like, hey, I'm running out of cards. I have a good amount of life total. This is working well. But then, and then end up winning once he kind of, ran out of threats, and I had a Warmongers on the right turn at the end. But then when I went back and rewatched the replay, like, it was actually a little closer than I thought. He was setting up a pretty good pitch stack. If he was able to kind of get his combo off, I might have taken quite a bit at the end, but luckily the Warmongers disrupted it, and he didn't quite draw the cards in the exact right order. That's the story of my event, and yeah. I felt like the deck was really well positioned for the metagame. It took a lot of people off guard, especially day 1. And even day 2 and day 3, once people knew it was up, it was still a very strong deck that played very close matches and able to edge melt in the end.
You don't have to go over the matchup, like what happened during the games, but what was the 4 decks that you played in CC day 1?
Yeah, I played a Dromai first round. I played Dash in round 2, which I was a little scared of because Dash was one of those matchups. So I presented Briar, and he said Dash, and I said okay. So I sideboard. I play like literally every legal card. He flips over his deck. As soon as I flip over Reaping Blade, he just looks at it and says, Oh no. And and so I go first, and I go like turn one, attack with Evergreen. And he tanks and he tanks. And then he says no blocks on turn zero, right? Like he could just block and redraw his cards, but he knows that like he's going boost plan and he can't afford to not he can't afford to just block with cards because he knows I'm gonna fatigue him. And a few turns later, I full block most of the things that he does, and he concedes because he knows that it's not gonna work out. He's on full boost version.
Does he like not even play out the rest of the game?
No, he literally concedes about 15 minutes into the game. Yeah, about halfway through his deck. Like he did, I
Sheesh.
think, boost away one or two max velocities, which was unfortunate as well. Then I played a Dorinthia, who played like 60 cards, and I just kind of out fatigued them. Then I played Alexi in the final round, who also presented 60 cards, assuming I was on aggressive version, and was able to fatigue them.
You've played fatigue decks a lot in the past. You played like the Warhorn Oldhim fatigue deck, Indie earlier this year. What draws you to playing fatigue decks over anything else? It seems to be like your calling card.
Because Fatigue is the best deck, and because people are really bad at building decks to beat Fatigue. A lot of players who play the game just don't kind of fully grasp what Fatigue is trying to do. They think, oh, they're just going to block, and maybe if I attack them hard enough, I can win. If they don't know what's going on, they're going to lose like 100% of the time. And as a competitor, I like it when my opponent loses 100% of the time, because that means I'm winning 100% of the time. And so I've done a lot of winning on these Fatigue decks. They've just been really good in the meta. The way the meta has shaped up at Indie and then here, I thought just was really advantageous to these kind of decks that just kind of play a different style of game than most players are prepared for. They're prepared to play one hand at a time, whereas I'm coming in saying, I'm going to play my entire deck against your entire deck, and at the end, I'm going to come out on top. And they're just not ready for that kind of game plan.
So you say they don't know what's going on. What is going on?
Basically.
What do they not understand? What's the like macro that they don't understand?
Yeah, a lot of players are going to drop their hand, their 4-card hand or 5-card with an arsenal or whatever, and they're going to run the math and say, ooh, I can attack for 15 damage or whatever it might be. And then they're just going to play that. And then they attack for 15. And then they, forget about that and they draw their next hand and they say, ooh, I can attack for 12. And then they attack for 12. And they just like repeat that over and over again. Every turn they just look at this hand, see what cards are in it, and then play them. That sounds very, straightforward because that's how you're kind of taught Flesh and Blood, right? It's a one hand against one hand scenario. But really what the game is about when you're playing against a fatigue deck is looking at the entire equity of your entire deck. Because the cards that you're not playing, you're pitching, and those are generally blues or lower power cards. And setting up pitch stacks and setting up situations where you can force through damage is really important when playing against fatigue. And a lot of players just are not very good at setting up those longer term plans, because just attacking for that same 12 to 15 or whatever the number is every single turn cycle is just not going to get it done. That is what I can block for every turn. And if you're not actually pushing damage on a turn by turn basis, you're never going to get through 40 life, right? You might get through 20 or 30 life, but you're never getting through the full 40 before you run out of cards in your deck. And so I'm basically preying on the fact that players play the matchup wrong and build their decks wrong and get punished by not having a plan into fatigue.
So it's more than this, but it's almost like you're flipping over your decks and you're adding up total damage in deck that opponent is presenting, but then you're adding up total block value in deck plus 40, and then saying, do you have enough total damage to present to hit that check mark?
Yeah, basically. I think when I initially built the Ultim deck back for Indie, and then I was telling teammates and friends about it, I basically said, when I sit down with this deck, I'm making a bet with you that says, I will give you 15 turns, which is the time it takes to go through first cycle of your deck if you present 60 cards, right? 60 cards times a 4-card hand. So 15 turns. Can you leak 40 points on me in 15 turns? You need to average about, 2.5 points per turn. And I'm going full defense. Can you do that much damage per turn? And if not, once we get to second cycle, you're never leaking a point again because your deck is full of blues and bad cards. I will take that bet that you can do 39 damage to me, but you can't do 40. And that works out pretty well in most cases against most players.
Yeah, I would agree. Most people do not go to these tournaments with a real plan, and if they do, it's like, I have a remembrance in my deck, or something half-baked like that, where it's not a full macro game plan. The game is decided when we both sit down on one side or the other. You made more planning than they did, so you win
And it's also a matter of execution. Players can have good plans within their deck. I mean, quarterfinals, Dan Rutkowski had Icelander deck that had a plan into me. He just wasn't able to execute it well. Either the hands didn't line up right, or maybe he made some, slightly wrong decisions throughout the course of, the hour and a half game we played. Right. The onus is all on my opponent when I'm playing these decks to make the right decision and to pitch stack correctly and to set up the big turns. And for me, it's just like block, block, block. Swing sword, block, block, block. Oh yeah, you didn't take out my whole hand. I guess attack for 7. Why not? Like my turns are pretty simple, all things considered, compared to the crazy mental gymnastics that I'm asking my opponent to do. And if they mess up once, they miss 1 point, they miss a card, they miss their pitch stack by one thing. That's a win for me.
Or they just get
And
unlucky or something, like their cards come to them in a cursed
yeah,
order. Like there's no unlucky really on your side. You're like, that's crazy, my cards block. I don't care what any of them do.
I have 3 cards in my deck, right? I've got red attacks that attack 3 for 7, with some minor variants. I've got D reacts that are red, and I've got blues that block for 4.
And
Right?
the reds still
Like,
block. Like the attacks, the 3 for 7s.
yeah,
Oh no, I drew a hand of 4 3 for 7s.
they block 3, like
Block.
for the most part. And so like the deck just has hyper consistency that like I don't really care what order my cards come in, but my opponent, if you're trying to pitch stack, a 3 of a kind into a Rain Razors into a Codex of Frailty, like you might just draw them in the wrong order. And like that is a ton of pressure on your opponent, and there's no pressure on me. Over the course of a tournament, over the course of a long match, opponents are going to mess up. They're just human, and I am not going to mess up because the deck is comparatively very simple to what they're trying to do.
Example of that happened to me at Baltimore. I thought we had a pretty good anti-fatigue plan. That goes out the window though when I draw 3 Rain Razors in the same hand.
Sure. Yeah.
I just lose the game instantly.
That's exactly what I mean. Is like you have cards that are very specific in what they do, and all my cards are the same card, give or take. Yeah.
What is your opinion on fatigue as something in the game? Do you enjoy playing fatigue personally? Like, do you derive enjoyment from this? Do you think it's good for the game? Do you think it's something that needs addressing in any sort of way of like, is it too good? Do we need more tools to deal with it? Or is it perfectly fine, leave it alone, people just need to get good?
I enjoy winning, and I have done a lot of winning
That's
with
crazy.
fatigue. So yes, I enjoy playing it. In terms of the
I
actual
like
mechanics
money.
I like money, yes. That is pretty much the long and short of it. Is right. Like I am a competitive player. I want to play the deck that wins, and if it's a fatigue deck that wins, I am perfectly happy to do that. It's also kind of like the inverse of golf, right? Where in a game of golf, your goal is to play the least amount of golf possible. Right? You're trying to get the ball in the hole with as few strokes. In Flesh and Blood, I'm going to a Flesh and Blood tournament. I'm trying to play the most Flesh and Blood possible, and that means playing every single card in my deck every single game, and then playing every single match all the way up into the finals. So I think I accomplished that by playing fatigue decks in Indy and then here at Nationals.
It's funny because when I look at it, it feels like you're playing the. I see what you're saying of like you're physically playing the most Flesh and Blood. The
Yes.
amount of cards, the amount of time. It feels to me like you're playing the least though of like you're almost like not playing the game. You're just I'm gonna sit here and watch you play the game. I'm gonna let you have your fun, and then when you're done, I will sign the match slip that I won.
Yes, I will sit down. I will let if we had a chess clock, which we don't, but if we did, the time on my opponent's clock would be way higher than mine. But I just like sitting there watching my opponent squirm and just try to figure out a winning line, and then
You're just vibing
they get
over
to play
there.
every card in their deck,
You're just
and
like
then at the end of the match, I tell them your deck wasn't good enough, and I'll take the win. That's how it goes. So yeah, I take a lot of satisfaction in winning that way. I think it feels more satisfying to win this way because I know that I came with a better plan, a better deck, as opposed to just running an aggro mirror in a way that who won the die roll, or who drew their 3 of a kind first, or whatever the the key card in the matchup is, who drew Channel Mount Heroic first. I find this way a bit more satisfying to win. Personally, that's just the way I view it, because it felt like I came in and actually defeated my opponent and not just drew better or got a little luckier.
and you're getting rewarded for all your prep time and everything.
Right. In terms of fatigue on the overall metagame or the overall state of the game, I think that Flesh and Blood, it has a rather unique system. The way you drop 4 cards per turn, you kind of pitch cards to the bottom. You can realistically expect to go through most, if not all, of your deck in many matchups, not just control matchups. And I think that's unique compared to other trading card games that, you draw 1 card per turn. You maybe see half your deck in a game, maybe, if that. This higher level of consistency and like kind of seeing your entire deck, I think is an interesting space for Flesh and Blood to live. And I think fatigue decks that really care about your entire deck are just the natural extension of that, of kind of utilizing the Flesh and Blood game systems to their fullest. And I would hate to see the concept of fatigue decks be completely eliminated from the design space or the metagame of Flesh and Blood. I think just the core design of the game encourages decks like those to exist.
I think I
And
agree with
I
that.
think we can talk about the power level, whether they're too good or too where they're at in relation to other decks in the meta. But I would hate to see them completely obliterated from the meta just because some people think they're unfun to play against. Those players need to get good.
So you think it is a get good problem?
For the
You
most
don't
part, yeah.
do you feel like it's an imbalance thing, or is it we have the tools to deal with it as is?
I think LSS has been pretty good about printing cards that are intended to attack this. We see Frost Hex being a big one in the metagame. The ability to set up auras on your opponent to deal with them, or to like, set up this big combo. Even Codex of Frailty, kind of forcing them to discard a card and then opening them up for another attack. And honestly, even before the most recent set, you just had more powerful heroes. Like the metagame right now, the top decks of the meta are just weaker than they've really ever been in the history of Flesh and Blood. I mean, you think back to Starvo era, like Starvo would demolish this deck. Yeah, Chain, Prism of old.
OG
Yeah,
Briar with
OG Briar with
the
Ball
ball
Lightning
stack.
and all that. Yeah, like throughout the history of the game, there were just stronger decks. And as those decks got Living Legend out, or cards got banned, Scalata got banned, Ball Lightning, all those kind of things, it just kind of brought the power level down to where, hey, just playing base rate, 3 for 7s that block 3, or D reacts that block 4, like suddenly that just brings it, like that is close to the power level of the best decks in the format. The best aggro decks are not going too much higher above that rate, and because of that, it just opens up a space for fatigue. And I imagine that as we get a new set, maybe there's a new illusionist comes on that, or like as people make it new prism decks that have this ability to go super wide with auras or whatever, or people figure out in set like other more powerful cards come out. I think it'll shift away from fatigue, especially as Crown of Seeds is now gone. So I think it's totally healthy to have occasional metagames where fatigue is good, and then as other decks power up and get more higher numbers on their attacking cards, fatigue fades out of the meta.
Mm-hmm. All right, so you guys heard it here first. If you're losing to fatigue, just get good. Just
Yes.
I do agree that it is a lot of like most players just don't know how to beat this kind of strategy, and if they did the homework, they could figure it
Mhm.
out. The tool,
Yeah,
I agree. I think the tools exist. I know for me, when I look at it, I think that it's an issue of it's too hard figuring that out for your average player. I feel like a
totally.
lot of it is 19D chess beforehand, and it's just mental. Like, didn't you say that earlier? It's mental gymnastics sometimes for them.
Mhm. It's there's a small number of, I mean, the Flesh and Blood community, right? There's tons of players. The number of players who actually really innovate and build their own deck completely from scratch is very small. And oftentimes it's players near the top end of the game, and then they go and they win a tournament with it, or top 8 with a tournament with it, and people copy it. And then they'll tweak it and modify it. They'll take the stock list and put their own spin on it. But people who are actually like really and building a deck from the ground up and saying, hey, what is my strategy? What is the purpose of every single card in this deck and every reason it's here, is very small. And the vast majority of your players are just going to net deck, and that's fine. That's how card games work. But it does mean that there's just not a lot of innovation to counteract decks like this, and most players are not equipped or not trying to even do it. They're just trying to copy the latest top 8 or latest win. This
That
is here
that
to
is
punish
one
them.
thing that I love about Fab personally. I feel like game plans is one of the most important things to your win percentage of just how prepared you are of not just versus fatigue versus any deck. And I that was something
Mhm.
that I almost instantly fell in love with, where it felt like with how many cards I see in my deck, I can sculpt a plan and say, this is what I'm doing this matchup. This should win me almost every game if I do X, Y, and Z. If I do this sequence of cards and I do this thing at the
Mhm.
right time, I pivot on the right turn, I go, oh, my opponent did this thing, I have my set, I drew the card to go with it, I'm just going to give you armor this turn and pivot in your face and just swing the game the other direction. Like, these kind of things is something that I love about the game. But I do agree. I think people need to focus on that more often, sit down thinking about how are they winning a game, how are they losing a game, not just 15, 12.
Yeah. Yeah, totally agree. Players are just going to copy those decks and play them how they think, and if they don't really fully grasp the entirety of the matchup and the plan, then they're going to struggle into better players who do understand that better.
So, very similar question here, just two different matchups. Tariq is asking about your thoughts on the Dromai matchup and if you had to dodge it or what was your approach to it. And then Matt was asking same idea against Control Dash. What's your plan there?
Yeah, just assume they're going to board incorrectly, and then you smash them. If they are Dromai and they, board 60 cards and don't bring in Remembrance or don't do that, they assume your Channelmon Heroic Briar, you're going to smash them. If they're Dash and they go, boost and they don't bring in all of their items, their pistol items, you're going to smash them. And if they do, you are going to get demolished. It's like 100-0, one way or the other. And the bet was that players in Swiss are going to guess wrong, and I'm going to smash them. And then once we get in top 8, if I pair into them, I'm going to lose. But at that point, I'm in the top 8. Whatever, accept the loss.
Were you worried about people scouting you and then knowing what was up and then that taking a lot of percentage from you?
I think by day 2 I was, right? Going back into the Classic Constructed day 2, I was worried about that, yeah. And I mean, it kind of came true, right? Michael Fang knew what I was doing and boarded appropriately. And it was a very close match. I think if he was on Bravo or Dash and boarded appropriately, I would have probably got crushed. But he was playing Lexi, who couldn't board quite as much, and I was able to capitalize. So I think the matchups did line up that nobody had a deck that could really punish me. The Control Dashes, the Dromais, or Bravos in a similar vein on day 2 or day 3, luckily.
Do you think that the matchup would still be good if it was a red line Dromai that sideboarded correctly? Because I feel like that version of the deck doesn't have nearly as much anti-fatigue stuff.
I think it comes down to the number of Remembrance, right? We've got this version does have Scar for a Scar, which is very important in the Dromai matchup. In fact, that's the reason I'm playing Scar over basically anything else in that slot. It can give you some tempo to clear. They go, Chromai and Mirror Guy the same turn. Now I can have a Scar in Arsenal, clear out the Mirror Guy, and then Sword to kill out the Chromai, or vice versa. I can get tempo back with the Scar for a Scar. Unfortunately, I only have 3 of them. If they have enough Remembrance to bring them back multiple times, I'm going to get out-tempoed by the end of it. Redline probably has a little bit less of that. If they're just presenting, 67, 70 cards or something, but don't have Remembrance for those key dragons, or don't have the high impact of like Tomotai, then I think it's possible. I think I can beat those ones. But ones that do have Remembrance or do have bigger dragons, that's going to be a big struggle for me.
The Lazy Dog asks, you're an engineer, a video game developer, and now a TCG national champion. Outside of continuing to pursue these interests, what other nerd culture side quests do you have on your to-do list?
Nerd culture side quests. I don't think I really know what a nerd culture side quest is. Are all of those just nerd culture side quests that I've already done?
I'd say so. Yeah, it's like you've checked off the list that you're like a big person in the video game industry, and now you're a big person in the TCG community. Are there any other? I mean, I guess let's start with: are there any other nerd culture things that you partake in? What else outside of Fab? And it's Blizzard, right? That you work for?
Yes, I work for Blizzard. I'm a game designer on Diablo 4. And so I obviously play a lot of Diablo 4 and think a lot about the video game industry, or specifically action RPGs.
So do I complain to you about the gem bag?
Sure. We're working on creating one. I don't know exactly when that's coming, but it's on the radar to be worked on. I do a lot of work in video games. That's been my career for a few years now. Absolutely love it. And so my hobbies are playing competitive card games, which I've been doing for most of my life, between various card games leading up to Fab. Other than that, I mean, the other nerd stuff I do is, I play a variety of a lot of other video games. I play a lot of board games. Well, used to play a whole lot of board games, haven't played any in a while since I moved and kind of lost my normal group again. Can't get together with them, but got to find a new board game group out here. I guess that's most of like the nerdy stuff I do. Those take up a lot of time for me.
So are there any things in that there's an accomplishment that you'd like to have?
I don't think so. Honestly, the things that I have been like kind of setting my sights on for like what I personally want to accomplish, I guess in life and I guess just in life, right? Have been around, my career. I wanted to get, work as a game designer and progress that career, moving up that ladder, because I really enjoy that kind of work. I like competitive card game hobbies, or just competitive hobbies in general, whether it be card games or video games. So winning tournaments like this is kind of like what I want to do, and I want to win nationals. I want to win worlds. I want to win the next pro tour. I want to win, every single tournament that I go to. I want to win that. And if I eventually, move on to another game or just, compete in another game, I want to achieve similar things in it. In terms of like other hobbies, I guess I don't have the same level of like aspiration that I'm like, oh, I want to go and do this thing. Most of my like goals that I'm striving for are really in my career and in competitive card games or competitive gaming. And then every other hobby or every other nerd side quest is just that. It's kind of a side quest. It's more for fun. I need some places to relax in my life where I'm just there to have a good time. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where what I do with like board games. That's what I do with different TV shows or other pastimes. Just honestly, like you need some highs and lows in life. You can't always be nonstop grinding for accomplishments. Sometimes you just need to step back and enjoy life.
Tell that to Brody and Fang going to everything.
Well, I mean, if they're doing that within the context of card games, great. I just hope at some point during their day, in their 24 hours or 7 days a week, they find some time to step back and enjoy themselves a bit.
So I guess we'll just call that your next to do list is find new board game group.
Yes, I do love me some board games, or like a D&D group even. For as nerdy as I've been my whole life, I've literally never played D&D in any kind of like coherent group, which I feel like is like a weird thing to admit because almost everyone does it.
To be fair, I've only
So
played like twice before, so I feel you
yeah,
there.
like I played a few like one shots here and there, but like I mean D&D has been skyrocketing in popularity the past few years, obviously with for many reasons. But now I feel like I need to expand my horizons a bit. I often am just like laser focused on the things I'm focused on, and
Mm-hmm.
so finding ways to expand my horizons always is always on my list.
TCG Talk asks, were there ever any times people in your play circle or just in general discounted your thought to make a fatigue Briar list due to it being unusual? And if so, how did you push past that? And I can personally say, when Dalton first talked about this in the group, I went, what is this pile of trash deck? Just infinite
Yeah,
generics. I was like, what is this? It took me a few times watching it to be like, oh, I see what's going on here.
yeah, I think there was definitely a lot of that the first time I posted the list. So I had mentioned before, my brewing process on this was just like, hey, there's some cool new Briar cards, and I remember there was this Briar deck that somebody played in the past at some tournaments, and let me just see what I can do. And then I just played it on Teleshar against other players, and like, hey, this is getting some good results. And so when I first posted it, like no one said anything, no one responded to it in the chat. I'm just like, hey, I think this deck's good, and then like crickets. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm still winning with it. I'm just gonna keep doing it until I stop winning.
That's
And I
how I
was
feel
tweaking
about
it, and
Dromai. I'm just on my own island with Dromai in the group.
yeah, yeah, that's kind of how I felt for a while. And the early versions were kind of rough. I mean, it obviously came to a more polished version, but like I was running cards that would eventually get cut. Things like Pummel. I had Barraging Brawnhide. I had Cryptic Crossing. I had Singeing Steelblade for a while. That card almost got played,
I actually really
but
like over that the what was it the slash Aether Slash or
yeah,
something?
instead of Aether Slash, yeah, the fact that you can,
Get an
uh,
Ashwing.
you yeah, you can kill an Ashwing with the slash, but Singeing Steelblade is better at getting an embodiment because you can more consistently cast it off just Tunic, or you can pitch a blue to create a Grasp Rune Chant and then attack with it and get 6. Whereas Aether Slash you can't because you're pitching to the Rune Chant. We moved to Scar for Scar in that same slot, same idea. Helps in the draw my matchup. But point being, I was playing a lot of bad cards back then, but I was still winning with it, and I was still like tweaking it and working on it. And I think there was a lot of discounting, and then I was just like building up the results, the stats myself. And then at some point after I'd been playing it for like just me for like 2 weeks or whatever, I'm like, hey guys, we need to talk about this. I've played 80 games and I have an 88% win rate. Like this deck is good,
Hmm.
or like some absurd win rate. It was like between 85 and 90% win rate over a
We
very
might
large
have
sample of
something
games.
here. Like this
Yeah, like
is
this is clearly doing something, and I don't know what it is. And so once I had kind of built up the stats, then people are like, okay, I guess I'll look at it.
mhm.
And people are still skeptical at first because it doesn't look great on paper, right? It just looks like you're playing these generics, and you are. But I mean the stats don't
You
lie,
are.
right? At the end of the day, at the end of the day, it turns out that the numbers were just good. It was beating up a lot of players, and even once we kind of, people were also very skeptical on the team when they're like, okay, yeah, you play against a random Talishar, which you probably have higher skill than, to be fair, because we're a team of some of the best players in the world. So there's a skill difference there, and also players aren't going to know what you're doing. They're going to, board incorrectly. I'm like, well, yeah, that's part of the appeal, right? It's Briar. Like, people think you're on Channel Mount, right? If you present Oldhim back in the day, they knew you were on a defensive strategy, right? You had no, sideboarding equity there. They know what Oldhim's about. They don't know what Briar's about. And so I tried to argue that as like a point in favor of it. And whereas people like put that as a point like against it, it's like, oh, you're just getting points for surprise, but it does matter.
I think
And
around
eventually,
then they actually did some testing where it was like, okay, what happens if we know what's going on from the jump? And I was watching some of that at the time, and that was when it sold me. I was like, oh, this is actually beating some of us internally when we know what's up. Like, let's sideboard like we know what's up, and where we know how to play against fatigue, and this is still getting wins, and even when it loses, it's not losing convincingly. It's like, okay, this is not
close,
tuned yet, and it's not convincing. Okay, we clearly have something.
Yeah, that was the point at which I'm like, okay, clearly this gains a lot of points for the surprise factor. But then, even if they do know, and it's good players who know what's going on, it was still a good deck. It was still a good, solid, fundamental deck. It wasn't going to blow anybody away if they knew it was up. It could still fight a reasonable game into them. And so, I think at that point, people started getting more on board. They kept seeing the stats, especially against just kind of random opponents who didn't know what you're doing. It was kind of crushing. What scared me, the scariest point in this entire process, was last weekend, well, 2 weekends ago, Battle Hard in Atlanta, the week right before Nationals. Another player took a similar list and made top 8 of the Battle Hardened with it, with Reaping Blade Briar. There was some difference in our lists, but not many. There weren't actually that many differences. I don't think they had Scar for a Scar, which was big tech, but for the most part, everything else was pretty much there. And
when I saw that, I assumed that he must have just played against one of us on Talishar and just like,
yeah.
Oh, this is pretty good. Let's click on the deck afterwards and see what's in here. I can make this.
Yeah, that was my fear too. It's like, oh my god, we played it too much. Like I think I personally played like 150 games on Talishar with it. And then other teammates played a bunch as well. And I'm like, oh no, we flew too close to the sun. We tried to keep this secret for too long. The deck got out there and people are playing it. And now, going into Nationals next weekend, people are going to see Briar and they're going to be like, oh hey, did you see that cool new Briar deck that popped up? And then I'm going to be like, yeah, don't talk about it,
Shut up!
Shut up, God. That didn't really end up happening. Like, I still... At least for me, day one, I was able to take most opponents by surprise. They didn't really have a game plan into it. I did make some adjustments based on that. Before that weekend, I was playing like the full 3 Sigils of Suffering because most players just wouldn't play Arcane Barrier in a Briar. They just were assuming we were going to race, and they don't have time to pitch to AB. Now that this deck was kind of on the radar, people are like, okay, don't forget your AB against Briar. And it's like, okay, we need to shave down on the Sigils and put in more Fates.
I do like the one just to like potentially close with. I saw you do that one time, and I was like, oh, that's cute.
That was the point, is like, well, also if they just see one, they need to like kind of constantly be thinking about it, and it's fine, right? It's we already have 3 Fates, 3 Sinks. We kind of wanted one more D-React. It works. It's fine.
The other thing that happened around that week too was the whole dev thing.
Yeah, there's that. Well, like after I apologize, I forget the name of the player top 8 in Atlanta with it. I can't actually find their deck list anywhere posted or to find their name.
I mean, maybe that was to your benefit. If you can't find it,
well,
maybe that's...
it partially was, right? It partially was that they didn't actually.
No one else did either.
Site. And so, but then in the dev like Twitter Spaces, they were talking about it. They talked about it, like, just shut up, don't talk about it. Like, it's just a meme deck, it's a joke. Forget about it. Forget about it. Meanwhile, like, all of our team is like, yeah, we're probably gonna end up playing this deck. And then I think even like the night before, there was like a judge conference or something, and they started off with a judge conference. I wasn't in it, but a friend who was in it said they started off like mentioning Fatigue Briar, and they went over like, yeah, remember how Crown of Seeds works because it's a resurging deck or like a something. And I'm just like, you've got to be kidding me.
I was this close to switching to it myself. I was like, all right, where's my Briar cards? And then the whole dev thing happened on top of that, and I was like, all right, never mind, back to Briar to Jeromai.
Yeah, it almost scared. I mean, it didn't scare me off because I was so deep at this point. Like, me and a few others we're so deep. We're like, we've played so many games, we don't have a backup deck. We're just gonna play this and hope for the best. And luckily, players either didn't put too much stock into the Battle Hardened Atlanta results, or they, saw it and thought it was a cute deck and just kind of discounted it, or if they did make an adjustments, it was so minor it didn't actually come up that it was still a good choice for that weekend. But obviously, I would have much preferred if it did not top 8 in Atlanta or was even there, to keep it more secret going forward.
Yeah, because like even if they saw it, I doubt almost anyone tested into it. It's probably
Yeah.
like single digits numbers of people that were at that event that prepped into it that wasn't already aware of the deck existing prior to that. Like, we knew about the deck. We prepped against it.
Yeah.
But like outside of people like that, probably not
Yeah.
many.
Yeah. I was terrified because I think the player in Atlanta lost in the top 8 the quarterfinals. But because they've played against Phi, which is abysmal for this deck, you can't really beat Phi. But luckily, not many people play Phi. But I just think, what happens if they actually win that battle hard end? Like, what happens then? I don't know. That might have changed a lot of things. But
You just play Fi.
that's not the world we live in.
You just play
I could
Fi.
have just played Phi. Believe it or not, I said I mostly was locked in on Briar. The other deck I was considering was Phi. If I was not on Briar, I would have been on Phi last weekend.
Was
on
it
Briar, and it worked out.
But was it normal Fi?
No, of course not.
I'll
Leave it
always
at that. Of course it wasn't normal Phi. What kind of question is that?
You always got to come with the spice. Cappy TCG asks, we've seen you succeed with fatigue strategies. What about those do you look at when you're brewing decks, and what do you think are the best ways to combat fatigue?
Yeah, I think when I'm looking to brew a deck, I'm trying to look at the overall power level of the metagame. So I take some of the top decks, things like Lexi in the current meta, Bravo for a while. A lot of people play Bravo at a high level. And I'm looking at these decks and I think, okay, like what are their turn cycles like? Like what kind of damage are they presenting? What kind of like packets is it in? Is it like 3/3/3, or is it one big chunk of 9, right? And I'm looking at those and trying to assess like how high are those numbers? How difficult is it to block those out given the tools that are available? And if the numbers that they're presenting are not so high, if they're low enough that you have the tools to deal with them, you've got Lexi attacking for 4 with a Searing Shot. Okay, well, I've got Sink Below and Fate Foreseen to deal with that. Just like their fundamental math on their game is easy enough to counteract, then fatigue is on my radar. If we're in a metagame where somebody is like the good play is 11 dominate go again Oakenald into a winner's whale. I'm not really looking to fatigue in that situation because 11 dominate go again is very hard to block out.
You're still looking to play Crown in that scenario, though. Always Crown of Seeds.
Yeah, probably play Crown. Always Crown of Seeds. But it's just assessing like the general relative strength of the metagame. And if the strength of the metagame is low, people are playing fair, doing numbers that are not, gaudy, crazy high, or in crazy hard to deal with packets, like Old Prism would go, a whole bunch of packets of 1. That's really hard to defend against. So if you look at that and you say, okay, the overall power level is low, then fatigue is a very viable strategy, and you just need to go and build the best fatigue deck and see how it matches up.
How do you combat fatigue? You had a thought too about like how your deck operates too here, right?
Yeah, the way the combat fatigue is by presenting things in unusual or in patterns that the fatigue deck is not ready to block out, right? If I like this Briar deck is really good at blocking 4 into 4 into 4 and like trying to block about 12 to 15 per turn. And if you instead set up turns where you can go like, here's 1 turn for 25 and then next turn I do nothing, that's much harder to block out. Or if you present, 20 packets of 1 damage, that's also really hard to block out. Mm-hmm. And so it's finding these ways of being different, either within deck construction, right? If you're going like with Ashwings or with, auras or just going bigger and,
old Viserai combo.
Yeah, or combo deck in some way, whether it be like Saber's Bolton combo or something, or like Build Up Rune Chance combo. It's just presenting damage in ways that the fatigue deck is not ready to deal with. If you're just presenting the same 12 to 15-ish turn after turn, that's not going to get it done. That is exactly what fatigue wants you to do.
So don't play into their strategy. They're here ready to do X, Y, and Z, and you said, I agree, I will do X, Y, and Z. So it's attack the deck on a different axis sometimes.
Yeah, don't play the game that they are ready to play.
To you, the viewer, if you want to see some more on that, I actually have that video with Yuanji a while ago, the implied value one. We actually talked quite a bit about that on there, where it's like sometimes you mentioned do nothing on a turn, then set up for big turn, where it's like if I do nothing on a turn, the value of your cards might be 0 because you're like, I wanted to block with these. It doesn't matter that I have 4 or 5 cards. I can't do anything with these. So the best thing I can do with 5 cards might be just throw 7 plus a rune chant. So I've converted your
Yeah.
hand into lower value, and then by doing nothing on a turn, I set up for a bigger turn later, and like different things like that. We like touch that on that quite a bit in that video. If you guys want to check that out, I'll put like a thing somewhere.
Yeah, and that's a really important part of building a fatigue deck is understanding that the way you're going to lose is by opponents doing these setup turns, right? They're going to take a turn off, they're going to do, arsenal a card, they're going to play an item, they're going to do something that sets up, and that's going to give you an opening to attack with your cards that you wanted to block with, but now you got to find something else to do with them because they're not attacking you. And that's why I think this deck, it's kind of pegged as this Fatigue Briar deck because that's how we win against Lexi and Dromai. But against a lot of other decks that want to play a more mid-rangey style, think things like Levia, which I didn't play any of this past weekend, but you play a lot on Talishar because a lot of people play Levia. You end up playing a much more mid-range value-focused game plan where I'm actively trying to attack you for 7 every single turn. You just have like really good value this kind of way, like, hey, if you're not pressuring every card on my hand, I have a really good way of punishing you, of attacking you back. And that attack also converts into more defense, right? If my 7 damage breakpoint hits even for 1 point, I get an Embodiment of Earth, and that's going to be huge on the defense and just gives me a ton of value. So having that ability to punish your opponent for those setup turns is really critical in making a fatigue deck actually work. You need to make them respect your aggression in some way, in some meaningful way.
And in that scenario, it's almost like you're carrying forward value into a future round.
Exactly.
Where it's like, my hand next turn might have only been worth 12 because I'm just going to block with my cards for 3. But because I got this embodiment, the value of my hand jumped to 16, maybe slightly less if one of them's an attack or something like that.
Yeah, and covering up a breakpoint, a 4 damage breakpoint, is worth like more than 1 point, right? If you're denying a valuable on hit. So yeah, the important part is having a punish for their setup turns that is meaningful in the matchup. And creating an embodiment is meaningful because it gives you better defense. In previous versions of fatigue decks like Ultim, the punish was sometimes we had Spinal Crush because that's, they have to block that or else they can't do their big turn. Or it could have been something like Healing Balm, right? It's like, hey, you took a big setup turn. It's like, well, I'll just heal 3. Like I'll still get my value out of this card. And in a way that like, hey, you're trying to set up to leak through 3 points. Well, I just healed 3. So you have to think about like what is meaningful in the matchup, like what actually makes them respect it. And then that's kind of your punish that you need to be able to throw out on the turns they take to set up.
Victor asks, what are the core ingredients to a successful Fatigue deck? Is Fatigue Briar better than Fatigue Bravo? Because we were seeing quite a bit of that, too, at the beginning of this meta, of, like, Pablo having a great run with it. And I thought that was really funny. I, like, accidentally psyopsed everyone, because I had Pablo come on the channel right before the calling. We were talking about Vincent. And at the end of the video, I just, like, unprompted, just, like, start asking him his thoughts on Bravo. Of it. Just, like, do you think Bravo's a shitty hero? What are your opinions on it? Like, what makes Bravo bad? And then, like, the next week he wins with Bravo, and I'm like, second place with Bravo?
I think you got second, yeah.
I'm like, I didn't mean to psyops everyone on that. I had no idea. The entire time I was asking him if he was playing Briar, because I wanted to know if I could make a funny video about him LLing Briar. I had no idea.
Yeah, that is funny. I think there are 3 main ingredients for the classic fatigue style deck, whether it be Ultim or Briar now. The 3 ingredients that you need good defensive tools that line up against what the aggro decks are doing. Right, so if the aggro decks in the current meta are things like Lexi, which are presenting 4 and 5 damage breakpoints over multiple attacks, well, turns out Embodiment of Earth makes things block for 4, and then Crown of Seeds covers the 5 damage breakpoints. You're actually really good at covering up Lexi's attacks. If the meta was much more about like, Phi, who attacks for 3, 3, 3, 3, 2, 1, or whatever those combos are, this deck is much worse at blocking out those kinds of things. So you really need to assess the metagame and see if your defensive tools line up against what the offensive decks are doing. And if so, that's, point number 1. Point number 2 is you need a consistent value engine. Normally this comes in the form of a weapon, right? You need, if you're just blocking cards, my deck against your deck, attacks are you generally block for 3 or 4 damage per card. Attacks are generally more than 3 or 4 damage per card. So you need some way to get back that value. And in this deck, Reaping Blade does that very well. You can just attack with it off a Tunic very easily, or you can spend 1 card for 4 with Rune Chant. So just having that consistent value engine, and it's why I think a deck like most Illusionists generally, or Rangers can never really be fatigue decks because they don't have that consistent value. I think there are some other ways of doing it. Some of the assassins, right? They've got the contracts that if they hit, they banish a card off the top of the opponent's deck.
I was
That's a
going to ask
way
you
of
about
getting
that.
consistent value. Yeah, if they hit, that's a possibility. But their actual weapon, the daggers, are really bad because they only attack for one, right?
Hmm.
As opposed to Regan Blade, which is 3, Anathos, which is 4 or 6. So there's some work to do for assassins on that bullet point. But that's why historically Guardians and now Briar have been good at fatigue, because they have a better weapon. And then the final one is what we just got through discussing, was the punish, right? Is your opponents are going to try to do these setup turns, or are otherwise going to give you tempo at some point throughout the game. You need to have a meaningful way of kind of punishing them and not giving them kind of a free setup, whether that be attacking to create an embodiment, whether that be gaining life, whether that be an on hit that they must block, like Command and Conquer or Leave No Witnesses or something to destroy their arsenal, and so on. So you kind of need all three of those to come together in order to make a really good fatigue deck. I think in the current metagame, Bravo has really good recurring value. He's got a great weapon, Anathos. He's got good punish. He's got great punish. Far better punish than we have here. Right? He can throw a Spinal Crush or a Showtime, Starstruck, or Crippling Crush, which is big punish against those setup decks. But he doesn't have the greatest blocking, right? Lexi is presenting odd breakpoints of 4 and 5, which he has some ways of dealing with, but most of his cards are only blocking 3, except for a handful of D-reacts.
Yeah, you're
Now,
like
if the
really
meta was
leveraging the armor there for that. It's like, okay, I only have
yeah,
threes, so like I got a fridge. Here you go.
right? But if the meta was different, right, where the top aggro decks were going super tall, they were Azalea, right? If Azalea was the top deck, and she's all about here's 12 dominate with on hit 5 things, well, you now have Staunch Response, which is a great Guardian card to answer that, and that's Staunch Response is a great thing if that's the meta, but the meta is much more focused around Lexi right now. That means that something like Briar is much better. It's also, there's a lot of Icelander, and Icelander presents a threat in the Ice Eternal Frostex combo, and Bravo has no real way of dealing with that, whereas Briar has the Diabolic Ultimatum.
And you
So
have the
it's
crown to
just,
break the frostbites if you need to, also, which
yeah,
is nice.
yeah, exactly. So it's her defensive tools just line up better into the meta than Bravo does. While Bravo has an advantage in the kind of consistent value department and the punish department, it's worse in the defensive aspect given the current state of the meta.
Coben Jack asks, first, congratulations to both of you for your run at Nats. I'm curious why Oasis over Peace of Mind, given how it works with Crown of Seeds to like the efficiency of like pitching a blue and it covers both of them. Was it because of Wizard or your ability to play it off of a Tunic, or was there something else that was your driving factor there?
Yeah, so the main factor was being able to play off a Tunic. I think that is a big point in Oasis's favor. Peace of Mind is great when it lines up exactly how you want it to, where, hey, they attack for 4, I block for 4, get a free Ponder, and now I can, whether use my last card to swing a sword or block with all my cards and still get an arsenal. It's great when it works perfectly. The problem is the game's messy. The game doesn't always work perfectly. And there are often times when you draw Peace of Mind, but you have no arsenal. And then you're like, I don't really want to do this. Like, I don't want to pitch a card just to block for 4. But you might have Tunic mana available, and then Tunic Resource, and then you can just cast the Oasis in that situation. Also, unlike Fatigue Oldhim, where Fatigue Oldhim really wanted to arsenal and pitch a card every turn because you wanted a crown and then Rampart. This deck does not want a crown every turn. Because you don't have Rampart, it's much harder to kind of efficiently use that pitch if you don't have a compelling reason, you don't have a breakpoint to block or something. So you don't actually end up crowning as often as you think. So
Mm-hmm.
Oasis often will come off of the back of Tunic. And even when you do arsenal a card, you're going to preferentially arsenal your defense reactions or an attack like Evergreen, or go again attack if you need it in a certain matchup. So oftentimes you don't even want to get rid of your arsenal. You want to stay there for when you get the opening to attack them. All of that is to say Peace of Mind was just a little bit clunkier than Oasis Respite, and we knew Icelander's in the meta, so Oasis kind of wins out there to block out Aether Ice Vein.
So it's like largely a consistency issue with the card.
Pretty much. You never want to draw multiple Peace of Minds in a turn, but drawing 2 Oasis is fine. It's okay to draw 2 Oasis in one hand. Drawing 2 Peace of Minds, it's miserable. Don't ever do it.
I can also see like sometimes too you not valuing the random card off the ponder. Maybe that makes you play weird. Well, I actually wanted this in Arsenal or this in Arsenal, but now I have this Ponder, so I feel priced into getting rid of these cards and then just taking the random card off the top of the deck. And now I'm priced into crowning that because I got a poop card into Arsenal that I can't do anything with, and it just creates weird play lines.
Yep. I think if you played one piece of mind in the deck, it would be fine, especially if there's a meta of more big attacks. But honestly, I don't think it's necessary given the current meta.
Kind
And
of like the Sigil.
I would not play more than one. Yep. You could, if you replace Sigil with Piece of Mind, you probably could have, done just as well. It wouldn't have really changed the outcome of this tournament, I don't think, for me, if I made that exact swap. I think it's close, but wouldn't play more than one because you never want to draw more than one at once.
That's pretty reasonable. Closet Follower, what are your opinions on talents? The only heroes in the LL are in CC are talented ones. Should there be more heroes with talents?
Yes, there should definitely be more heroes with talents. I think the concept of talents is great. That, hey, there's like a base of your hero class, like, the Runeblade, and then there's this extra flavor elemental, right? Okay, now you have this fusion effect, or, if you're engaging that kind of thing. No one fuses around here. But
you can fuse. You could come in with an Evergreen for 8 and draw a card.
I have never fused in this deck.
You did make your first embodiment, though.
You can make embodiments of lightning, but I think Force of Nature is the only fuse card in this deck. I think I have played, I don't know, 150, 200-ish games with this deck. Never once have I fused. So
I'm surprised that's never come up. I'm like,
me too, honestly. So, but point being, I think the concept is great. I think the execution leaves something to be desired at the moment. Right now, we have elemental heroes, or like just from Tales of Aria, with the exception of Icelander, who came right afterwards. And I think Icelander's maybe like the successful like exporting of ice to a class that it didn't originally come in on. But for most of the other ones, think Light Shadow or like Draconic, we did not like expand it. They made new Light and Shadow heroes, but it was like the same classes, right? It's, oh, here's another Light Illusionist. Or they don't even have another Light Warrior, but another Shadow Runeblade.
Do we even have a Light Warrior?
In Wrath, we do.
Yeah, you did pretty good with that.
It's great. Yeah, I guess I would love to see them take that concept and expand it more, because right now there's not really a compelling reason to play an untalented version if there's just a talented version you could play. Right? Like, the only reason to play Dorinthia over Bolton is Dorinthia-specific effects, like her specializations and her hero power, which are good, and that is a reason to play Dorinthia. For so long, it's like, why would I ever play Bravo when I can just play Oldhim, which has almost the exact same card pool, minus Showtime and Crippling Crush. In exchange, you an entire set's worth of, Elemental Guardian cards. And it was a hard sell to say that you should play an untalented hero, and I think that's still kind of true. I kind of just wish, if the idea is talented heroes, we should just always have talented heroes, and we should expand it more. I want to see, I don't know, Draconic in another class. I want to see like a Lightning Ninja is like top of my list, right? I want to see more things like that in Classic Constructed. That I don't know how soon that'll happen, but I think that's the correct design space to go for, and I think untalented heroes should be the exception rather than the norm.
I feel like Katsu's been the closest we've had to, like, I have a reason potentially to play this over Phi, where you, like, have this distinctly different game plan that could be better into a different field, and your crazy rounds function differently, and you have better blocking value, so it's like, you have a reason to play this, but it's still, like, dubious.
Yeah, because you do gain like the different hero effect, but like I don't see why a different hero effect or different specialization needs to also come with half the card pool, right? Phi just can play all the same combo cards. Yeah, he doesn't have the pure power, but he also gets every Draconic card, and so like he just has double the number of cards he can play compared to Katsu. That's not actually the correct, it's not actually double, but like that's the idea. Is that, yes, there's this differentiating value for Katsu, but why does it also come without its own set of talents? I don't know.
And the last question from Stackswell. Do you think you would have as much success with this strategy if it was public? Do you think surprise factor was a big factor in the matchups? We kind of touched on this a little bit, but...
Yeah, it was huge. I think on day one, It was absolutely vital. Like if I had just flipped over a hero that instead of saying Briar, Warden of Thorns, it said Briar, I'm a fatigue deck, right? Just on my hero, I don't think that I would have had an as easy run to 4-0 day one as I did, right? They would have been much closer matches. If I flipped over Oldhim, people would have known, and maybe I still could have won, but it would be much closer matches. So the fact that I was able to masquerade, at least on day one, as a Channelmon Heroic Briar, and the fact that this wasn't really on people's radar. Like when Oldhim was in the meta, people knew that Oldhim was a thing. I think going into Nationals this weekend after US Nationals, if people try playing this deck at their own Nationals, I think they're going to struggle more than I did because people know about it, right? People will see, oh, you're on Briar, let me hedge. I have a strat. I have an idea about this.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think the element of surprise is very important, and that's why I was particularly upset to see someone else do very well with it at Battle Hard in Atlanta the week before.
It's funny. You're saying like I'm screaming I'm a fatigue deck. I think you got to
Yeah.
cool it on the fatigue decks a little bit because removing the fact that I knew what you were on going to the event, if I had sat down
Yep.
across from you, I'd have been like, I'm at least bringing in one remembrance. I don't trust you.
I don't trust you. Yeah, I did worry that I personally had a bit of a brand, right? And players were going to be like, "Oh, Charles Dunn, he's that fatigue guy." I mean, if I didn't going into nationals, I certainly do now. And so when I show up to like calling Dallas or at Worlds with like Rhinar, people are gonna be like, "Oh, it's fatigue Reinhardt for sure." Right? Like they're gonna know.
So
And
we gotta
so
take a defensive deck and
yeah.
slant it aggro for the next thing.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know what that here would be. Maybe it's like 9 pummel Bravo and just like, you know, just go full out aggression and just pummel you every turn.
Sift foe,
I don't know what it is, but
sift foe. Go Royal
yeah,
Bravo. Draw some cards.
maybe, maybe. But yeah, I think that now that I have a bit of reputation personally, and this deck is out there, if we ran back U.S. Nationals, everyone plays the exact same deck, I would not have nearly the same level
Mm-hmm.
of success. I don't think.
Any closing thoughts before we sign off?
Yeah, I mean, just big shout out to all my teammates on Fabled Runaways. Specifically Michael Dalton and Pat Eschke, who really helped me early on with the refining of this deck, and of course everyone else on the team. Big shout out to everyone. You, Lucas, Dan, who all top 8'd as well. Really happy to be part of the group that has had so much success.
Anything that you want to shout out or plug personally?
No, not really. I'm available on Twitter at tinman354. I generally will answer and engage on Twitter, but I'm not really much one to plug content at this moment.
Thanks so much for going on.
Thank you for having me.
You're at the end of the video. Thanks for watching so much. If you're still here, first of all, I just want to give a huge shout out to all the new patrons. Really helps the channel. I'm going to be adding more content to the Patreon soon, such as a guide on how to make your own game plans. It's just $5 if you wanted to join, and it does help me make more content for you guys. Secondly, if you want to hear more about beating fatigue, check out the video over here. I posted it earlier in the video, but just like here's the thing that you can click on now. This is my implied value video with Yuanji, where we cover a lot of those concepts of the more in-depth strategy of how to beat fatigue. It's just kind of a subtopic within it, but it was a good video on getting better at the game. I plan on making an extensive video, though, on how to beat fatigue in the future. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you.